Right, it's time for us to see what the headlines are across Nigerian newspapers, and I have here This Nigeria. We'll begin there now. And it says, on strike, federal government pleads with Labour to sheath the sword. All right, it's focusing on the strike. Federal government pleads with Labour to sheath sword. No going back, palliative insignificant. All right, NLC, TUC are saying that as IGP expresses concern, warns against violent protests. Okay, that's what This Nigeria says. Okay, the Blueprint newspaper is next, and it said fuel subsidy removal amid threat of protest today. Federal government begs Labour please caution. Okay, that's what the Blueprint newspaper has. Amid threat of protest. Amid threat of protest today, federal government begs Labour and police cautions. The Punch newspaper, subsidy talks, Labour shuns federal government, begins protest as oil workers down tools. Labour shuns federal government, begins protest as oil workers down tools. That's what the Punch newspaper has. And how federal government, NLC meeting deadlocked, Labour, PDP berates Tinubu's proposed pay rise. All that you see on the front page of the Punch newspaper. Nigeria News Direct. Labour ignores federal government's plea, proceeds with strike. Display violence and pay for your actions. Acting IGP Ebetoku warns, and police CSOs call for dialogue. Okay, Nigeria News Direct, that's what it says. And from there, let's go to the Daily Independent. Fuel subsidy removal. Nationwide mass protest starts today. Labour insists and says that what federal government has put on table as palliative is not enough. Okay? A nationwide mass protest starts today. Labour insists. And all right, perfect mobilization from state affiliate unions. Police warn against violent protests or order watertight security. Okay, you see that there. But one of the things there, it says that what federal government has put on the table as palliatives, not enough. Kemi.
Right. First, leadership is next. And leadership is talking about, let's look at First News, actually. First News is still on the scheduled protest. On First News, it says Labour set for showdown with government today. Of course, a lot of meetings have been held between then and now. Labour insists on a showdown with government today. That's on First News. And leadership is next. The big story there is on palliatives. Labour begins a nationwide protest. Federal government declares action illegal. In the meantime, the IGP, the Inspector General of Police, beefs up security, warns against violence, and representatives to monitor palliative implementation. All that and more on the leadership. On The Guardian, the lead caption is Rising Hardship, NLC defies truce, proceeds on nationwide protests. All right, that's on The Guardian. On the Daily Trust is police on alert as Labour begins protests nationwide. Police also reportedly disperse anti-subsidy protest in Kano State, and workers are adamant in Oyo State. That's on Daily Trust. The Nation now. IG warns against violence as Labour insists on protests. The Inspector General of Police warns against violence as Labour insists on proceeding with the much talked about protest. Nature News is giving us a different, lead story. Electricity Commission shares energy tips to help consumers reduce bills. Electricity Commission shares energy tips to help consumers reduce bills, especially in this dispensation of the fuel subsidy removal. Finally, it's Business Day. President Tinubu's power reforms target 6 discos, ownership and management. President Tinubu there reportedly talking about power reforms and targeting 6 discos, ownership and management. That's all from me, Mike.
Okay. Let's talk about the story. The NLC are insisting they want to continue with the protest today, and That is the focus. If you see on the papers, most of the papers today have that story.
Right.
And of course, we'll be monitoring that to bring you up to speed with developments there. But the federal government is saying, listen to what we are doing, follow what we are doing. Palliatives have been rolled out, and we've been talking about the breakdown of all of that, 500 billion, worth of different things the federal government wanted to do. There's the 75 billion naira to about 75 enterprises, at 9%. And then there's also the 125 billion naira to energize micro and small scale enterprises. There's also the 200,000 metric tons of grains, 250,000 metric tons of fertilizer, seedlings, and other inputs. There's the 50 billion naira each to cultivate 150,000 hectares of rice and maize. There's a 50 billion naira again to each to cultivate 100,000 hectares of wheat and cassava. Yeah. There's the 100 billion naira to acquire 3,000 units of 20-seater CNG fueled buses. And the minimum wage is being recalibrated, and so on. So these are some of the things. But the NLC is insisting that all these palliatives is not enough. Recall that the government also has said that, they've saved about $1 trillion. The president said that they've saved about 1 trillion naira, which certainly will go a long way in some of the things they still want to keep doing and so on. So I wonder why. Anyway, we have not had the details of the breakdown of the discussions they had. But one would say this is the first time this kind of palliatives are really being rolled out anytime in Nigeria. Right.
But you've also, tried to balance the stage that talks are in at the moment. The Labour is saying that, as good as all these appear to be, they're still on paper. All the plans by the government, the palliative measures taken by the government, according to Labour, is still on paper. But, from the little they have said, the picked holes at the 1 trillion naira recovery of funds claims, by the federal government. They also picked holes in the 3,000 provision of 3,000 CNG-powered vehicles, saying if you spread that across the federation, how many will that be in terms of, the states of the federation, 36 plus the FCT? How many will that be? And considering our enormous growing population. So they insist the government can still do better. And it also kind of reflects with, the position of the resident doctors who are still on strike. It's a week now or thereabout. The government has proposed a 25% raise, and they say, no, it's not enough. And on the part of Labour, there was a meeting, another round of talks yesterday. We understand the NLC president, Ajaero, wasn't there, but he was ably represented by his deputy. But from the feedback from the government, as we saw in the report earlier in the day, the Labour groups, the TLC and the NLC and the TUC say they will, go back to their, delegations. They'll go back to their full bodies, and, transmit the latest position of government, which government is saying, on the other hand, that they ended on an encouraging note. And, of course, the issue of, continuous engagement is what the government is still happy on. That definitely this is just like a preliminary announcement by the federal government. There will still be more announcement. There will still be more tweaking of, this and that, as long as the room for communication is over. And it also reflects with what people are saying, on the outside. While Labour says there is no going back on the protest, more and more groups are also asking, urging, Labour to not, shut down room for engagement that is very critical at this time. We cannot, of course, sideline the position of the security forces. IGP has also been talking loud, as we see all over the papers this morning, asking that Labour conduct itself responsibly, and so to forestall a breakdown of law and order.
Well, that's it, and that's quite instructive, because the acting IG is concerned about because if you listen to what he said, well, there are times when incidences like this happen, and then sometimes part of it is hijacked by hoodlums. Don't forget what just happened in Adamawa State. It's a curfew in Adamawa State following the activities of Sheila boys who, broke into, broke into warehouses of NEMA, into people's businesses and stole a lot of things and so on. Now, there was also the concern of that spilling into other states around and so on. And it tells you that if you listen to the goings on and the statement of the IG of police, he said that there's a likelihood that this could snowball into and give credence or could give a platform to some of these boys who were just waiting for that opportunity, to carry out the acts that they want to carry out. And that's part of why they've been saying Labour should watch it so that hoodlums don't take advantage of that situation. But however, Nigerians are reacting to this. There are some people we have heard who have said that, well, Labour should go ahead because what the government is putting on the table, because in the past, they've never really seen it. Of course, when government says they're giving out palliatives to a lot of Nigerians, to the poorest of the poor, sometimes you don't really get to see the distribution of those palliatives. And they say that government, this time around, even if they have to trust the government has to do it differently. Now, we've talked about some people calling, or civil society organizations calling for government to publish names of people when these distributions are made. And then even sometimes the media is there at the cost of distribution. Let Nigerians see that these things are being distributed and everyone has access to them. But anyway, we'll have to leave it here now because of time, but we'll wait to see how these things will pan out. But certainly trust us to bring you up to speed with all the developments today. If the protest still goes on, as Labour is saying, we'll let you know from across the country what the issues are and how people are reacting to it and coming out for that and reacting to that.